Hi, today we're going to go through 3 stretches for the quadriceps and hip flexor muscle groups. These ones are very important for people who spend any large amount of time sat down, maybe a desk job or driving, or maybe you just spend a lot of time sat down at home and you need to alleviate the tension put into these muscle groups. Because in a sat down position, your knee and hip are in this position, it means that the muscles up at the top of the thigh here are in a shortened position. So after a period of time they will become stiff, and in a prolonged state they can actually become shorter. So we need to work at lengthening these muscles out in order to allow the pelvis to function properly and hold its proper position. Okay, so on to the first one. We're just going to use the chair here to be able to hook your foot up onto. The idea is we're just going to bring the bum back towards the heel, stand up nice and tall, and you feel the stretch in the quadriceps muscle group here at the front of the thigh. At the moment the stretch should feel like here in the main bulk of the muscle. So we're just going to hold the stretch. I like to do the stretches about 2 or 3 times. On the first time, hold the stretch for maybe 10 to 15 seconds. Then come out of the stretch, go back into it again and hold it maybe slightly longer, maybe 20 to 30 seconds. You should feel the muscle ease and the tension should release as you're doing the stretch. After that point, then you've probably gained the most you can from that stretch at that time. So that's the first stretch. You would repeat it on the other side with the other leg. The second part of the stretch we're going to do is we're going to come back into the same position. So back, the bum coming towards the heel, but this time you're going to rotate your pelvis forward. So by that I mean this direction. You're pushing the lower part of your pelvis forward and the upper part backwards, which means you're going to flatten your back slightly. So as I do this, you have to stand up nice and tall. You should feel the stretch change from lower down to higher up over the hip itself. So that's getting into that hip flexor muscle group. So again, you're just going to hold this. Again, you can come back slightly more to get the stretch more advanced. And again, really focus on turning that pelvis. That should definitely feel it over the hip. If you're still feeling it down in the quadriceps, then you're effectively probably not rotating that pelvis enough. So we've got 2 stretches there, the quadriceps and then the hip flexor one. Very similar, but it's important to turn that pelvis to really focus on that hip flexor group. The last one we're going to do is just move the chair out of the way. We're going to do this is specifically for the hip flexor, and we're going to come into a deep lunge, knee on the floor. Put some padding under your knee to protect it if you're on a hard surface, and then we're just going to focus on, imagine we're going to drive the hip down into the ground. So the idea here is we're going to push the hip, so it's not too forcefully, but your focus should be trying to think the movement is pushing that hip down into the ground. So again, I just place my hand here. That gives me that feeling of being able to push that hip down. Again, to make the stretch more advanced, focus on turning that pelvis again. So the more we turn the pelvis, the more we can feel the stretch on the hip flexor. Other ways to make the stretch more advanced is placing your hands above your head, so reach up tall and again turn that pelvis. And one step further is to turn to the side. So because I've got my left leg back, it would mean I turn to my right, and the opposite way for the other leg. So again, I can feel that. It's a real deep, strong stretch for that hip flexor. Again, very important. I can't emphasize this enough. People who are sat down really need to be doing these stretches. You need to mobilize that pelvis area and the muscles here at the front. Not only are they acting on the pelvis, but your psoas muscle, one of the major hip flexors, is actually running from the tops of your thigh bone through your pelvis and actually attaches onto your lumbar spine. So if you imagine if that's tight, it's going to be pulling down and pulling forward on your lumbar spine, which means your curve in your lumbar spine is going to be increased. So really important to do those stretches to keep the pelvis in a neutral position and keep your posture in a neutral posture.